Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from Nassau Community College at 90.3 WHPC, also streaming on nccradio.org. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. This program is repeated Sundays at 11 p.m. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy Passover, Chag Sameach. Of course, this all depends on when you are listening and joining us. So, as I love to say, hello on the radio, hello online, and hello to the world. And here we are now in the middle of the holiday of Passover with the last 2 days, which of course is Monday and Tuesday, April 29 and 30th, marks the conclusion of this great holiday, 8-day holiday of Passover. I hope your Seder was inspiring, and I do appreciate you joining us today as we continue our thoughts on the great holiday of Passover itself. So, with that in mind, I would like to share with you some of the thoughts that I've gathered, that I learned, that have inspired me in my own Seder and in the Seder that we celebrated together with the community. As you remember, as you know, we began the Seder the same way we do other holidays, with a toast of a Kiddush, which formally sanctifies the day. As on the first of the Seders, the Kiddush provides an insight to the holiday of Passover. It is how we begin the most special night of the year, Kaddish. We make Kiddush. The first mitzvah given to the Jewish people, the prototype mitzvah of all mitzvahs, was not Yom Kippur, Shabbat, or the Ten Commandments. Do you know what it was? What was the very first mitzvah given to us as a people? It was a directive to establish the Jewish calendar. It was given in Egypt prior to the Exodus. The words were, Achodesh Hazeh Lachem. This month shall mark the first of the months of the year. God says, this is the first mitzvah. Everything depends on it, on the time, on the calendar. Why was the calendar the first thing God commanded us to do? We hadn't even left Egypt. What is it? What's the foundation? Why was this the foundation for everything that was to come? The answer is that the difference between a slave and a free human being is not how long or hard one works. Free people often work long and hard and take on grueling jobs that require incredible commitment. In fact, free people usually work harder and longer than those who are not free. Many free lawyers, doctors, and business persons work a staggering number of hours. The difference between a slave and a free person is who controls their time. A slave is commanded when to start and when to stop. Control over time is a fundamental difference between slavery and freedom. A slave can never walk away. So God says to the Jewish people in Egypt, until now you were slaves and others owned your time. You could do only what you were ordered to do, and only when the Egyptian slave masters told you to do it. Now at the dawn of your freedom, the first mitzvah I will give you is to make you the masters of your own time, and therefore masters of your own destiny. The first commandment that God gives the Jewish nation is an essential prelude to freedom. It says, the time is yours, it's yours to use as you will, so value it and make it holy. It is a gift, but also a responsibility. The great Hasidic master Rabbi Yitzchak of Badishev once looked out of his window and watched the bustling crowds as they rushed about their business. He leaned out and asked someone, "Why are you rushing?" The man replied, "I'm running to work to make a living." So Rabbi Yitzchak answered, "What makes you so sure that your livelihood is in front of you, that you have to rush to catch up with it? What if it's behind you, running towards you? Maybe you should stop running and let it catch up with you." I understand what the rabbi meant. We can sometimes work so hard to make a living that we forget to live. We become a slave to work, not allowing the blessings that we have accumulated catch up with us. We're always moving and never stop to enjoy the scenery. Perspective is hard to gain while we're in motion. And therefore, on the night of the Seder, as we step back from the daily grind to celebrate the holiday of freedom, we take charge of our time and sing the Shechiyanu prayer, thanking God for all of our blessings. That is why we began the Seder with recognizing the time and the day. I want to tell you about Henrietta Zold, the mother of thousands. The Passover Seder narrative begins with these words. I'm sure you remember it. Hey lach ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat with us. So the holiday of the freedom begins when we teach our children to transform past afflictions into concern for others. The opening salvo of the Seder is about inviting others. We start with an invitation. When the Jews were released from the Egyptian slavery, the Torah commanded, "You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." God was teaching us a crucial lesson. Because you were in Egypt and felt the pain of abuse, learn from it not to oppress the stranger, the orphan, or the widow. You have been hated, therefore now love your neighbor. Certainly, the Israelites could have derived an entirely different lesson from their slavery experience. Having suffered, they could very easily have felt compelled to inflict suffering on others, as happened so many times in history. Their motto could have become, "Do unto others before they do unto you." Our history could have become one of vengeance, and our perspective defined by bitterness. Along comes the Seder, and begins with the exact opposite approach to suffering, calling us to transcend victimhood and move beyond the suffering. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat with us. Judaism wants us as individuals and as a people to use pain as a springboard for good. The experience in Egypt should lead us to hold an open hand, not a clenched fist. In 1909, a woman in Manhattan named Henrietta Zold learned that the man she loved for years and planned to marry had abruptly gone off and married a younger woman, which he had just met. Zold was no longer young and knew that she would not find a husband. A lesser woman in her situation might have withdrawn from the world and immersed herself in self-pity or anger. Instead of wallowing in despair, Zold channeled her unbelievable love into an empire of good deeds. She founded the Hadassah, which over the course of decades inspired millions of Jewish women to perform great deeds of love, including saving the lives of children in Nazi-occupied Europe and founding one of the world's leading medical centers in Jerusalem, known as the Hadassah Hospital. Unable to find a man with whom to share her love or heal her wounded soul, and unwilling to see the tremendous love go to waste, she built a worldwide organization to dispense love and healing. Disappointed in her personal life, she insisted on doing good for the world. When she died, she was buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, and her grave reads, "Mother of Thousands." Henrietta tasted the bread of affliction and rejection, but stayed resilient and said, "Kol dichvin," whoever is in need, I will help. I will bring blessing into the world, not despite my suffering, but because of it. Let's continue in our little journey, in our reflections once again on the night of the Seder and how it should impact us throughout the year. You know, Manishtana, the value of asking questions. When Rembrandt's most famous painting, The Night Watch, was restored and returned to the Rijksmuseum of Art and History in Amsterdam, the curators performed a simple yet remarkable experiment. They asked visitors to submit any questions they had about the painting. Some of the questions focused on issues which curators usually don't like to talk about. How much does the painting cost? Has this painting ever been forged? Are there mistakes in the painting? Other questions focused on traditional artistic issues. Why did Rembrandt paint the subject? Who were the people in the painting? What techniques did Rembrandt use in this particular work? The curators then prepared answers to the top 50 questions. In a room next to the gallery, housing the night watch, the curators hung the public's questions and answers. Visitors had to pass through this anteroom before entering the gallery. The unexpected result was that the average length of time people spent viewing the painting increased from a mere 6 minutes to 30 minutes. Visitors alternated between reading the questions and answers and examining the painting. They reported that the questions encouraged them to look deeper and longer and closer to remember more. The questions helped them interact with the masterpiece and create richer ideas about it and see it in new ways. It brought the painting to life and turned one-way viewing experience into a dynamic conversation. Why do questions produce such dramatic results? Why do they transform the entire experience? Questions arouse curiosity and stimulate the brain with fresh ideas and thoughts. They put us into an eager moment or mode to learn and a different kind of frame of mind. That is why Judaism encourages us to ask and inquire. In yeshiva, the traditional school of Jewish learning, we had a teacher who loved questions. The more challenging we could make them, the better. When he asked a particularly tough question in response to something that he had taught, he would say in a heavy Yiddish accent, "You're right. You're 100% correct. Now let me show you where you are wrong." What he meant was, when you ask a question, even if it's wrong, you're still 100% right, simply because you asked a question. The Mishnah states that the Passover narrative must be constructed in response to questions asked by a child. If there is no child present, adults must ask one another. Questions are the bedrock of the Seder and the fuel that keeps it going. The one who asks gains a deeper understanding and becomes a partner in the learning process. He or she is no longer a passive recipient, but an active collaborator. To ask is to grow. Now, let me address, one of the things we addressed at our Seder is about the suffering. So much suffering going on. People often ask, why do the Jewish people suffer so much? Well, from one perspective, Jews suffer less than other people. Other nations suffered for a time and then vanished. They don't suffer anymore because they no longer exist. The Egyptians suffered, shoin, gone. The Babylonians suffered, defeat, gone, disappeared. The Greeks and the Romans did their suffering, they're gone. They can't suffer anymore. Seems that the Jewish people seem to be suffering all the time. But if you live to be 120 years old, you are bound to catch a lot of viruses. The Jewish people are 4,000 years old. We caught lots of viruses because we have lived very, very long. It's not that we suffer so much, it's that we've lived very long. Our suffering is a signature of our longevity, and thank God for that. Some of our history is painful, of course, as the Haggadah itself reminds us of what happens in every generation. But we endure. Empire after empire declare their intent to destroy, yet these empires have vanished into oblivion while the Jewish people still live, defying all the natural laws that govern the history of nations. So during the night of the Seder, we celebrate knowing Hashem is with us, giving us the strength to meet any challenge. This is the truth that we live on the holiday of freedom. To live is to suffer, but also to experience so much joy. Now, the having this in mind, we also have a little insight here that we discussed about two tactics of anti-Semitism. Listen in, my friends. Listen in. We say, Vayareu Aisanu. Vayareu Aisanu HaMitzrim. And there are two understandings of this word. Number one is the Egyptians treated us badly. These are the words from the Haggadah. A second understanding, the Egyptians made us out to be evil. Vayareu Aisanu. They accused us of being disloyal. They painted us in disloyal colors. Both of these interpretations are in fact two stages in a cunning plan of attack. First, you demonize, which prepares the groundwork to subsequent persecution. We can better understand the Egyptians' two-stage blueprint of attack by way of this illustration that I heard. Among the most striking and powerful museums in the world is the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. But at first glance, it contains a structural oddity. The exhibit fills 3 floors. The top floor covers the rescue of the survivors and the aftermath. The middle floor portrays the Holocaust itself. But the entire first floor, which can take hours to go through, consists of the Holocaust prelude, the propaganda of the 1930s, the relentless Nazi campaign to dehumanize the Jewish people long before the genocide began. So one might wonder, why is the prelude to the Holocaust given as much space as the events of the Holocaust itself? The answer is simple. Crimes against the Jewish people don't emerge out of thin air. Rather, they have been preceded by lies, demonization, vilification, slander. Before they are attacked, they're made into pariahs. In order to be attacked, they have to be put beyond the pale. The groundwork is laid for the horrors that are eventually to come. People can't turn on a dime. Their attitudes need to be shaped first. And so today, in the world that we live in, we see the same strategy of the Egyptians, who were the first anti-Semites. Their contemporary descendants first demonized Israel, falsely accused it of grotesque crimes, apartheid, war crimes, genocide. Their overriding objective is to brand one country and one people as uniquely evil. The whole point is to delegitimize the planet's single Jewish state and thus turn everyone against Israel, God forbid. It aims to put Israel aside, outside of the global community of shared humanity and solidarity. Over time, this propaganda erodes public support. Of course, it is absurd that Israel, the country that brought democracy, free press, independent judiciary, academic freedom, and women's rights to the Middle East, is the one that stands vilified and accused. But just because the accusation is Orwellian does not diminish its danger. In fact, it magnifies it. To say Israel is a genocidal country is to make the destruction of Israel and to harm to its supporters as an act of righteous justice. All those who committed to decency must join together in fighting against Pharaoh in whatever age. If we do not act, it is our most cherished values and ideals that will come up under assault. Passover reminds us that the battle for freedom is never fully won, but at the same time must be fought anew in every generation. Now, as we went through the Haggadah, we also came across the following sentence: Kalabo hayelod hayeir tashlichu. Whoever this is also part of the decree that Pharaoh had at that time, that every baby boy was to be thrown into the river Nile. Moses' mother made a wicker basket and set it afloat on the Nile, hoping and praying that somehow the baby would survive. The basket in which Moses was placed in Hebrew is called the teva. The word teva or teva is only used on one other occasion in all of the Torah, in the narration of the flood. Noah and his family were saved from the waters because they went into the teva, into the ark. The Torah is making an association between these two events. Moses' ark, like Noah's, was not a sailing vessel. It possessed neither steerage equipment nor a captain. The passengers completely relied upon God's protection for safety. They rode the waves, but God steered the ship. Sometimes we too find ourselves adrift in life's perilous waters. People may have discouraged you. You may feel stressed and worried. You might wonder how things will ever work out. Like Noah and Moses' mother, we have to do our absolute best that we can. But then, like them, we also put our trust in God. He has the final say over what will happen. Remember, amateurs built the ark. Professionals built the Titanic. We're not on our own. We have the most powerful force in the universe as our captain. He can, as our captain. He can turn the small vessels we create into instruments of redemption. During the course of the Seder, I'm sure you remember how we all remembered the 10 plagues and how they are put into groupings, Tzach, Adash, Achav. And there are different customs. Some people with their little pinky pour out some of the wine. When they say these 10 plagues, Chabad has the custom of just basically tipping the cup, not putting the finger in, but tipping the cup. Either way, everybody pours wine out of the cup. Then we come to a Rabbi Yehuda, a rabbi who groups the plagues into 3, because with the exception of the last, they occurred in 3-fold patterns, attacking from different spheres. The first, blood, frogs, and lice attacked from the water. That's called the tzach. They came from the water. The next 3, wild beasts, cattle plague, and boils, attacked from the land. The last 3, hail, locust, darkness, emerged from the atmosphere. Let's think of them as God's Marines, Army, and Air Force. There are 3 major purposes for the 10 plagues. First, to force Pharaoh and the Egyptians to free the Jewish people. The second was to punish Pharaoh and the Egyptians for the terrible suffering that they had inflicted over the Jewish people over hundreds of years. Third, to demonstrate that the Egyptians, to the world, that God, there's a God in the world, and he has master over nature. They are not the gods of this world. And finally, the 10th, the death of the firstborn, taught that God controls life and death. The firstborn Egyptian society was slain, as they were the ones who implemented the genocide. So these 3 lessons were conveyed to the Jewish people and the Egyptians in stages. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda expresses these stages by grouping them in plagues of 3. This was no indiscriminate onslaught. It was a set of targeted strikes intended to send a message that still reverberates today as we think and recognize that God is in charge of everything in the water, on the land, and in the atmosphere. Now, at the end of the Seder, towards the end, we open up the door and we put up the 5th cup. It's called the Cup of Elijah, and we open up the door. Tradition tells us that the prophet Elijah visits every Jewish home on the Passover Seder. It also teaches that he appears at every circumcision, where a special chair is set aside for him. Why is it specifically the prophet Elijah who has been our guest throughout the centuries? Why is it this particular prophet? The Bible tells us in the book of Kings that after Elijah defeated the priests of the Baal, along with a large group of those who had reverted to paganism, he fled from Queen Jezebel. She was outraged with him for humiliating her pagan priests and wanted him killed. Elijah fled into the desert to hide. During this time, he cried out to God. He said, the people had forsaken your covenant. Ozvu, they had forsaken your covenant. That means they have destroyed your altar. And he said, Va'ani v'saver ani levade. I'm the only one, v'yavaser ani levade. I'm the only one left. So he was depressed and wondered about the certainty of Jewish survival. He was alone, persecuted, a refugee in his own country. After all the years of his hard work spent inspiring everybody, it amounted to nothing. They had forsaken God, and that's what he was saying. They have destroyed your altars, they've forsaken your covenant, they're not doing the circumcision anymore. So God says to him, hello, no, Elijah, your efforts have not been in vain. You will visit every Seder and circumcision, and are therefore destined to bear witness, constant witness, to the eternity of the Jewish people. You will see so much joy and so much survival. Because you said, Ozu brischa, the Jews have forsaken my covenant, you will be present whenever a male Jewish child enters into the covenant, into the bris. In fact, you will be known as Eliyahu Malach HaBris. You said, you have destroyed my altar. You will be present when every Jewish family sits around the table and celebrates the Seder, when their tables are transformed into altars. And you said that I'm only left alone. Not so. You will crash more Jewish celebrations than anyone in history. In the 1950s, there was a magazine called Look. Look magazine featured a lead article that said, The Vanishing American Jew. Ironically, by the 1980s, Look magazine had gone bankrupt and vanished. Its building is now the Chabad of Midtown Manhattan. I made the last part up, but we are working on it. God was teaching Elijah and us how to look at the Jewish people. We must never despair and constantly build Jewish life. Doing so guarantees that we will ultimately behold a glorious future. So as we open up our doors here on earth, God opens the doors in heaven. This time, the mystics teach every individual, regardless of the spiritual level, can ask God for any blessing. Let's open up our hearts in prayer. Let us beseech God to grant us a very happy and healthy year. This is what went on in our minds as we opened up our door on the night of the Seders. Now, I also want to share with you what I call the big 5 ideas in the Seder. Big 5 ideas. In the 1930s, Winston Churchill was at the nadir of his career. His insistence that Britain rearm to fight Hitler was unpopular in a country that had so recently been devastated. It was known as the Great War. One day, the famous writer George Bernard Shaw sent him 2 tickets to the opening night of one of his plays, along with the message, Dear Winston, here are 2 tickets. Bring a friend if you have one. Winston returned the tickets with a note. Dear Bernard Shaw, unfortunately, a prior engagement prevents my attending the opening night. But I would like a ticket for the second night, if there is one. Well, because the first night was such a hit, I'm sure everybody was happy to say that we had a second night. Erich Hoffer, the distinguished American thinker and writer, once said that a thin book usually reveals what the author knows, while a thick book usually attempts to conceal what the author does not know. The Haggadah is a thin book, and it indeed reveals to us what Judaism wants us to know. It's a guide to the core of our Jewish identity, a succinct primer on who we are. It wants us to understand 5 key ideas from the Exodus story that have profoundly influenced the ethical, spiritual, and social consciousness of the Jewish people. The first idea and lesson that I've come away with from the Haggadah during this week of Passover, that history has meaning. Exodus teaches us that history has meaning and purpose. It has a direction. It is not what Joseph Heller once called a trash bag of random coincidences blown open by the wind. Exodus affirms that God is continually and deeply involved in human affairs, and that human story is the deliberate, purposeful plan of the divine. We are actors in a drama larger and more dazzling than we can imagine. This is expressed in the 4 cups of wine we drink during the Seder. They symbolize God's fourfold promise of intervening in history, moving us towards redemption. That's my first idea, the big picture of the Seder. The second is God's sovereignty over nature. See, Exodus demonstrates that God's sovereignty over nature is absolute. Unlike the pagan gods, who were somewhere between human and omnipotent, God is not controlled by nature, but controls it. The Genesis creation story teaches that God is the creator of all existence. The Exodus story of the plagues reminds us that God did not simply create the universe, then withdraw into solitude and go down to Boca Raton, but instead actively imposes his sovereign will over all of nature at every moment. He made the world, and he moves the world. This is expressed when we enumerate the 10 plagues during the Seder. The third big idea of the Seder: human beings cannot defy God. Exodus demonstrates that human beings in the end cannot successfully defy God. Pharaoh first arrogantly dismisses Moses with that cynical statement, "Who is this God that I should heed him and let Israel go?" In the end, however, he must rise in the middle of the night and run in his pajamas to Moses to announce his utter surrender. "Go, with all the Jews with you. Worship God as you said." God gives everyone the freedom to act, but his will is inevitable. Human delusions of grandeur will eventually give way to divine vision of redemption. I'm not finished, my friends. I got 4. Number 4. 4 big idea in the Haggadah, that God cares. He is the Redeemer from injustice. Exodus reminds us not only that God is powerful, but also that he cares. He is the Redeemer from injustice. The direction of the universe is fundamentally moral and ethical. The revelation at Mount Sinai opens with God identifying himself as the one who brought the Jewish people out of Egypt and freed them. It doesn't start off with God who created the world. If God wants to boast, shouldn't he said, "I'm God who created the cosmos"? Isn't that more impressive? Which would put at the top of our resume. Who would not want to put on top of the resume the words "creator of the universe"? Freer. Well, what's more important, creator of the universe or freer of slaves? Yeah, maybe creator of the universe is more impressive, but the Torah states that the supreme attribute of God is, above all, is that of a great liberator. He helps people in need. God cares, and so should we. This is expressed with the opening words of the Seder narrative: "Let all who are hungry come and eat. All who are in need come and share the Seder with us." Kindness is the core of God's work for this world. And finally, what's the 5th big message that I have from the Seder? The ultimate redemption in the future. The Exodus experience of liberation in the past inspires our faith, our trust in God, and the ultimate redemption in the future. The Exodus becomes a call for revolutionary hope at all times, regardless of the historic conditions at any specific time. What appeared to be fate written in stone, the unending enslavement of a small people to its indomitable empire, is revealed as a fleeting phenomenon. There is no way, the way things have to be, no inevitably to political or natural facts. Instead, we should all remember, dear friends, there's a superpower, supernatural power, presiding in the universe who helps an individual or a people. and through their own efforts, change history for the better. This idea is expressed in the cup of Elijah that symbolized the hope of redemption, that there's always another chapter to be written. And therefore, as we come to the concluding days of Passover, let us relive the story of Exodus, which has shaped and continues to shape the Jewish people, filling our hearts and minds with joy and hope for the future. I'm not finished yet, my friends. You see, our Seder took for many hours, thank God. I hope yours as well. We all know we go to college, we go to higher education, takes years sometimes to get that degree, and then so too, the night of the Seder, the more time we spend, the more success and the more impact we have in the coming years. So, as you remember, at the beginning of the Seder, there was actually 15 steps. How many of you know that February the 1st marks one of the most important anniversaries in American history? Most of us don't. I didn't know until recently. You see, February the 1st is known as the National Freedom Day, the day that President Abraham Lincoln signed the joint House and Senate resolution outlawing slavery. That resolution became the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865. Arguably, February the 1st is more significant than the 4th of July. On July 4th, we threw off the yoke of a foreign power and attained independence. But millions of Americans still remained enslaved. It was only when the slavery was abolished that America began to live up to its declaration that all men are created equal. When we genuinely begin to proclaim liberty throughout the land to all of the inhabitants. Why is such a pivotal date in the history of America not more widely known? And here's the Passover question. Why is the emancipation of the Hebrew slaves, which happened 3,300 years ago, widely known? Ever thought of that question? The answer is simple but supremely important. You see, national memory dies without national ritual. For 3,300 years, Jews celebrated the Passover Seder. During this Seder ritual, we tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. We eat matzah and bitter herbs to remind us of what it felt like to be oppressed. And we drink wine and sing songs to celebrate the fact that we're here to tell the tale. Because Passover is not a date or a concept, but a set of deeds, mitzvahs, it has never lost its power to inspire the imagination of successive generations of Jewish people. It is inscribed in the grooves of our habits and our memories. It reminds us of the battle for freedom, human dignity, equality, tzedakah. The righteousness is never over and must be fought in every age. So sadly, National Freedom Day has no ritual, so its memory has faded. Rituals are the way that a people preserve their memory, keeping faith with those who came before and passing on their legacy to the future. Those practices and the ideals they represent, such as honesty, generosity, compassion, love, justice, Torah and mitzvahs, are the most important things that parents can give to their children. The reason that we are able to keep the national identity alive for millennium is because of the mitzvahs. That is the technology that has allowed us to survive. Therefore, the message of Passover remains as powerful as ever. Let us teach our children and grandchildren to perform all the Jewish rituals to make sure they never lose their identity. Now, during the Haggadah, we talked about the 4 children. Everyone knows that in the Harry Potter series, the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is divided into 4 houses. I don't even know if I can even pronounce these four houses: the Gryffindor, the Hufflepuff, the Ravenclaw, and the Slytherin. Each house teaches its students how to be a great wizard in a unique way, tailored to their individual strengths. It seems to me that the author of the Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, must have read the Passover Haggadah, because there's a striking parallel between it and her books. Hogwarts' four houses for four different groups of children has an uncanny similarity to the four types of children that the Haggadah describes at the Seder. The house of Ravenclaw prizes learning, wisdom, and intellect in its members. This parallels the Chacham, the wise child in the Haggadah. The house of Slytherin values shrewd, cunning, and ambition. That parallels the Rasha, the wicked child in the Haggadah. I'm not quite sure how Gryffindor and Hufflepuff parallel Haggadah's two other children, but with 2 more cups of wine we shall figure it out. The Haggadah and the Hogwarts may not be precisely correlated, but their 4 categories illustrate a key principle of education. Each student is endowed with unique character traits, and talents. Each child should be educated according to his or her own needs. And each child has to be made to feel special just as we do and have done for thousands of years at the Seder. The psychologist David Scott Yeager assigned 44 7th grade students to write an essay about a personal hero. All the papers were collected, and the teacher then marked up the essays, providing written feedback. At this point, the researchers randomly divided them into 2 piles. For the essays in the first pile, they appended a generic note in the teacher's handwriting that said, "I'm giving you these comments so that you'll have feedback on your paper." The essays in the second pile got a note reflecting what the researchers called wise criticism. It said, "I'm giving you these comments because I have a very high expectations and I know that you can reach them." After the papers were returned, the students had the option of revising and submitting their papers for a chance to earn a better grade. What was the result? Stand by, everybody. 40% of the students who got the generic note chose to revise. 80% of those who received wise criticism revised their papers, and in editing their papers, they made more than twice as many corrections. So what makes the second note so powerful that it rewired the way the students processed criticism? When they got back their papers, full of corrections and suggestions, their natural reaction might be defensive or even mistrust. The teacher hates me. But the wise criticism note carries a different message. It says, "I know you're capable of great things, and if you just put in the work." The marked up essay is not a personal judgment. It's a push towards excellence. Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky of blessed memory is fond of reflecting on how his father would discipline him in his youth. When he did something his father disapproved of, his father, in a calm, firm, and non-nonsense tone, would say in Yiddish, "Es passt nicht," which means, "This does not become of you." Those 3 words spoke volumes. The child was not being told that he was bad or unworthy. On the contrary, he was being guided not to do something because that particular behavior was beneath him. Es passt nicht meant that he is just too good for that sort of thing. This is the diametric opposite of an insult. Instead of the emphasis being placed in the wrong behavior, it was placed on the great potential the child possessed. He was above such behavior. Es passt nicht. This is what the researchers call wise criticism. "I'm giving you these comments because I have a very high expectations, and I know you can reach them." So inherent within the very rebuke was the greatest compliment. Being as you are a person of excellence This is simply incompatible, out of character for you. In the Haggadah, the wise and the wicked son or children sit beside each other, reminding us that it doesn't matter what kind of child we're dealing with, the Ravenclaw, the Slytherin, the Chacham, or the Rasha, each child is precious. Each child is part of our family, and when we focus on their potential and emphasize the positive, we push them towards excellence and dramatically improve the chance the child will improve. My friends, I appreciate you listening and joining us as I share with you some of the insights I've come away with. It's still, turning in my mind coming out of the Seder's. There is also an important thing to appreciate. We spoke earlier about the first mitzvah given to us was the power of time, the freedom of using our own time, not being told what to do and when to come and when to go. Jewish holidays have existed for over 3,000 years, and yet they never arrive on time. Right? You ever heard Jewish people talking, the holidays are early this year. Oh, the holidays are late this year. I give up. Not once. They never come on time. This is Jackie Mason, right? Besides for the holidays always arriving at the wrong time, the Jewish calendar is unique in many ways. Perhaps most striking is the fact that it has 2 different days dedicated to the New Year. We have Rosh Hashanah, it's the Jewish New Year, which we are most familiar. It falls on the first day of Tishrei, which is usually in September, and marks the day when the Jewish calendar advances, like we move from 5790 to 5791. But counting in months, we also have another New Year, beginning with the Hebrew month of Nisan, the month marking the event of Passover, usually in early spring, as we have this year in April. Tishrei is the month of Rosh Hashanah, is not the first month of our calendar. It's actually the 7th. The Torah instructs us about Rosh Hashanah and specifically says, on the first day of the 7th month you shall sound the shofar. On the other hand, in the calendar of the months, the Torah is speaking of Nisan, this shall be as the first of the year. In the secular calendar, January is both the first month of the year and the beginning of the new calendar year. We alone have a special new year for the yearly calendar as well as for the monthly calendar. Why do we have 2? Each of these new years have a distinct meaning and something important to teach us. The first day of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, is the universal. It marks the anniversary of the creation of the world. It's also the anniversary, Jewish New Year, marks the anniversary of the creation of the first human beings, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. Not the first Jews, but the first human beings, the ancestors of all of us, of all of mankind. The first of Nisan, the new year of the months, is particular and commemorates the birth of the Jewish people, their redemption from Egypt, and the beginning of their journey to Mount Sinai. This dual celebration tells us something unique about Judaism. We commemorate both New Years and mark the birth of humanity as well as a whole and the birth of our own people. Both are subjects of deepest concern. We think of our people, but not only of ourselves. We think of humankind too. We have thought, prayed, and worked for the enrichment and the prosperity of humanity at large. The prophets of Israel had a message for the Jewish people, but they also had a universal message, encouraging the pursuit of universal justice, righteousness, and peace. In modern times, Jews have excelled in observing the universal message of Tishrei, working for the entire world and striving for universal human well-being. And this is how it should be. But we are a little bit, we have to remind ourselves to also remember the message of Nisan, to remember the Lachem for you, for our own people's growth and continuity. Some time ago, there was an editorial in the Pilot, a very prominent Catholic paper, which read in part, "The Jew in America has taken the melting pot notion much too seriously and has, as a result, put behind him many traditions which were really too precious to lose. Instead of making their tradition part of an ever richer America, they have often set their own aside to pick up the undistinguished American one. Where this has happened, there are poorer, and America is poorer. Interesting. The Pilot editorial was correctly arguing that by being true to Jewish faith, we have the unique ability to enrich the lives of others. What makes Jews different is what provides them with something special to give. Everyone loses when we forfeit our sense of self. In 1995, the former Chief Rabbi of England, Jonathan Sacks, flew with then Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, to attend the funeral of Yitzhak Rabin. On the way, Blair read the Daily Mirror. Where he finished, he looked up and noticed the rabbi engrossed in the book and asked, "What are you reading?" "Why, the weekly portion, the Torah portion," Sacks said. "Tell me, what does it say?" The Prime Minister said, and for the next few hours they talked Parsha. Blair, obviously moved by the experience, for years to come when Rabbi Sacks visited 10 Downing Street, Tony Blair would begin the conversation by asking, "Nu, what's going on in this week's Torah portion?" At a public dinner, sometimes after the flight, Blair said that Rabbi Sacks is one of his heroes. "It was he who inspired me to reread the Bible and rediscover its power and its wisdom." Because Sacks did not dissolve into a melting pot, the wisdom and the moral grandeur of Torah had a positive impact on Great Britain. By living not with the politics of the moment, but with the parsha of the week, we become an inspiring voice in human story. These are messages that everyone needs to hear, and we are uniquely positioned to speak them with clarity and with passion. Rosh Hashanah tells us to remember the universal message of Judaism. But this is only half of our calling. We have a second New Year, the month of Nisan, and it pleads, remember yourself and to the people and your heritage, of which you are an unbelievable, indispensable part. There's an intriguing discussion in the Talmud about when the final redemption will come. Rabbi Lezer says, B'Tishrei, it will come in the month of Tishrei. Rabbi Yeshua says it's going to come in the month of Nisan. The Talmud does not reveal which of the two opinions is correct, and the rule is that when there is no decision, we may assume that both are correct, which I take to mean when we learn to unite the messages of both New Years to synthesize the redemption of themselves and of the world, then we will see the glorious day when the magnificence of heaven will dwell on this earth. So there's so much insight, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of the things that I've been learning about this great holiday of Passover. Do you have a tendency to feel insecure? Is your confidence the consistency of Jell-O? Do you feel inadequate about what you intend to do in the future? The great news, you're in good company. When you think of Moses, we remember him as an historic leader who led the Jews out of slavery. But we forget that Moses doubted himself too. At the burning bush, God appeared to Moses and told him to return to Egypt to free the Jews. Instead of immediately complying, remember Moses argues with God and said that in the past he had tried to help, but had failed. He felt the Jews would not take him seriously and that Pharaoh wouldn't listen to him. He had a stuttering problem and made him very self-conscious. He felt unqualified for the task. The moment was too big for him. Then God simply said to Moses, "Ma zeh biyadecha?" What do you have in your hand? You see, God shifted Moses' attention away from anxiety over the past and the future. He said, in essence, use what you have now. Stay focused on the present. You have a staff in your hand. Use it. God showed Moses that it didn't matter what he thought he needed. The creator of the universe can take what you have and turn it into whatever it needs to be in order for you to accomplish what he's called on you to achieve. We can all make excuses. I'm not qualified. I made too many mistakes. I don't have the talent, the eloquence, the personality, the confidence. God says, I know all of that. I created you. But what do you have in your hand? All I ask is that you use it. Before slaying Goliath, David probably thought, God, I'm too little, too young, too inexperienced. Goliath is powerful, confident warrior. How can I fight him? And God said, David, I know that. I know you don't have air support or helicopters backing you up. But what do you have in your hand? Pebbles and slingshot? Baby, use it. Use it. Esther said, God, I can't go in there to speak to the king, Queen Esther. I have no diplomatic training. I don't have any influence. He will not listen to me. He may kill me. God said, Esther, what do you have in your hand? Can you throw a wine party? Can you schmooze a bit with Haman and the king? Don't worry. I've got you covered. You do your part and I'll do mine. Pharaoh's daughter heard the baby boy's Moses cry. She probably thought, hey, it's me, one girl against an empire. And God said, what do you have in your hand? And she said, nothing. God said, well, if all you've got in your hand is your hand, use your hand, for God's sake. And she extended her hand towards the basket and changed all of history. What's in your hand today, dear friends? What do we have in our hands? It may not seem much, but God asks each and every one of us to use it. He wants to take us to places that we've never dreamed of. He wants to pour His blessing into the work of our hands so we can lead rich lives that He has in store for all of us. Dear friends, we already have everything that we need. What do you have in your hand? You have a talent. You have abilities. These are all God's blessings. We wouldn't be alive if God thought we would be failures. The fact that God brings us into this world every single day is a reminder that God has faith in us. So let's conclude. Ilu hotzi hotzi anu mim Mitzrayim hotzi anu mim Mitzrayim dayenu 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 dayenu. Please enjoy the last days of Passover. Wishing you all Chag Sameach.
1, 2, 3, 4.